At 6:42 a.m. on May 20th, 1941, Sergeant Alfred Clive Hulme was at the Field Punishment Center near Platanius, Crete, watching the sky over Maleme Airfield turn hostile. German paratroopers poured down in drifting canopies, scattered across olive groves, roads, and open fields, an airborne assault arriving in waves, with thousands already on the ground and more still coming. Hulme wasn't with a rifle platoon. He was the provost sergeant for 23rd Battalion. 8 months in the job, no battlefield record, no tally of kills, just discipline and procedures. And the men under his immediate control weren't the best of the battalion either. He supervised 23 New Zealand soldiers held at the punishment center, men arrested for fighting, being drunk on duty, or stealing supplies. On paper, they were trouble. In reality, they were trained soldiers who'd made mistakes. And in the next few hours, mistakes didn't matter. Only whether someone could shoot. Paratroopers hit the ground in every direction. Some slammed into trees or tangled in their chutes and died before they could even unclip. Others landed cleanly, regrouped fast, and began building firing points as if they'd rehearsed the terrain. The 23rd Battalion had been on Crete only a short time. Many of the New Zealanders had never heard shots fired in anger before that morning. Now they were facing an invasion that felt like it had been dropped straight out of the clouds. Hulme sprinted for weapons. He reached the armory and took what he could, rifles, ammunition, anything with a bolt and a trigger, and shoved it into the hands of the men in custody. No signatures, no authorization, no waiting for orders to filter down. There wasn't time. The prisoners didn't argue. They took the rifles and moved with him toward the gunfire. By noon, Hulme's improvised unit had already been in multiple fights around the airfield approaches. German fire came heavy, machine guns chattering, mortars thumping rounds into dust and rock, and a constant, unnerving pressure from snipers you couldn't locate. Hulme pushed forward anyway, hunting down isolated groups of paratroopers who dug in ahead of the New Zealand defensive line and were bleeding it with small arms fire. As the day wore on, bodies accumulated in pockets, where those dispersed German drops had turned into hardpoints. But another threat became obvious almost immediately. The snipers weren't just accurate. They were invisible. The German marksmen worked like professionals. They slipped into folds of ground, picked elevated cover, and started cutting down the people who kept units alive. Officers, radio operators, runners, anyone who looked like they mattered. New Zealand infantry doctrine didn't have a clean answer to that kind of harassment in that kind of terrain. You couldn't suppress what you couldn't see. By the time someone caught a muzzle flash, the man next to him was already on the ground. On May 21st, Hulme was moving between forward positions when rifle cracks snapped through the air. A corporal dropped just to his left. A second shot, and another man went down. Hulme threw himself behind an olive tree and searched the ridgeline, scanning for movement, shape, shadow, anything. There was nothing. Whoever was firing had blended into the island. That afternoon, Hulme volunteered for a job most soldiers avoided, to go after the snipers himself. His battalion commander approved. For the next 2 days, Hulme operated largely on his own. Slow, patient counter-sniper work. Hours of observation. Careful movement. Waiting for the tiniest mistake from a hidden shooter, then striking with one clean shot. It worked, but not fast enough. For every sniper he removed, another seemed to appear. The German pressure didn't ease. The casualties didn't stop. On May 22nd, back near the punishment center compound, Hulme came across a lone German paratrooper separated from his group. Young, disoriented, moving like someone who had lost the thread of the drop. The moment the German realized he wasn't alone, he brought his rifle up. Hulme fired first. One round sent a mass. The paratrooper went down. Hulme approached the body and saw what the man was wearing. Distinctive German camouflage gear that would pass at a glance in the broken vegetation and sun-bleached stone of Crete. Beside him lay a well-kept rifle set up for precision work. Hulme stared at the equipment longer than he needed to. He didn't think about trophies. He thought about the men who had been dying without ever seeing their killer. He thought about how close the German snipers could move, because no one could confidently identify them at distance. And he thought about one simple advantage that mattered more than marksmanship: proximity. Here's the decision that turned him from a counter-sniper into something far more dangerous. Hulme stripped the German camouflage and took the rifle and ammunition. He didn't ask permission. He didn't file forms. He pulled the camouflage over his own uniform, checked the action, counted what rounds he had left, and walked toward the enemy positions carrying enemy kit. Before dawn on May 23rd, Hulme moved through the olive groves west of Maleme, dressed to look, from a distance, like one more paratrooper shifting between scattered positions. The German drop had left units dispersed and communications chaotic. Men were constantly relocating, regrouping, and re-establishing firing points. In that confusion, a single figure in German camouflage didn't draw attention. At range, he blended into their assumptions. His first target that morning was a sniper hidden in the ruins of a stone farmhouse overlooking a road used by New Zealand patrols moving between Platanius and the airfield. Hulme watched through field glasses as the sniper worked methodically, slow scans, controlled breathing, the calm of a man who believed he owned the ground. Hulme didn't crawl. He didn't dart from cover to cover. He simply walked in, steady and open, the way a soldier returns to his post when he thinks he's among his own. The sniper glanced up, saw German camouflage and a German pattern rifle, and went back to his sightline. No challenge, no alarm. Hulme closed the distance until the shot was certain. Then he raised the rifle and fired once. The sniper dropped without a sound. Hulme searched the body quickly, taking what mattered: ammunition, grenades, anything that could keep him moving. In the same ruins and pockets of cover, he began finding scraps of information worth more than bullets: notes, maps, penciled markings that hinted the Germans had a clearer picture of New Zealand positions than the New Zealanders wanted to admit. Hulme kept it all and moved on. By midday on May 23rd, he had used the same approach again and again. Walk in like he belonged, close to lethal range, fire one shot, disappear before anyone understood what had just happened. The camouflage did more than hide him. It hid his intent. To the Germans, he was friendly, right up until the instant a sniper collapsed. The effect on the New Zealand lines was immediate, even if nobody fully understood why. Sniper casualties dropped in the areas where Hulme operated. Patrols began to move in daylight without paying the usual price. Radio operators survived long enough to pass messages. Officers could lift their heads and see the battlefield again. Something had changed, and the change moved like a ghost through the olive trees. On May 24th, Hulme pushed further. He began operating behind the German forward elements, hunting snipers positioned too deep for normal counter-sniper teams to reach. The work required him to pass through concentrations of German infantry, at distances that should have been suicide, sometimes close enough to hear conversation, close enough to catch a glance and a casual wave. The deception held because the German formations were still loose from the drop, and because no one expected an enemy to walk through them in plain sight, wearing their own patterns. That afternoon, near Galatas, a German officer approached Hulme, barked something in German, and pointed sharply toward a ridge. An order, a direction, a piece of the plan. Hulme didn't understand the words, but he understood the gesture. He nodded once, said nothing, and walked away as if he were following instructions. The officer watched him go and turned to something else, never realizing he'd just given guidance to the wrong man. An enemy who now knew where German attention was about to focus. By the evening of May 24th, Hulme's independent hunt had turned brutal and effective. His count had climbed into double digits. His commander tried to force him to stop and rest. Hulme refused. The snipers were still killing New Zealanders, and he wasn't finished. On May 25th, the New Zealand division launched a counterattack to regain Galatas. The Germans had turned a school building into a strongpoint. Machine gun fire pinned down the advance and threatened to break the assault in the streets. Hulme joined the attack as it stalled. When his platoon was stuck under fire, he moved forward alone through rubble and broken walls, reached the building, and threw grenades through the ground floor windows in rapid succession. The machine gun went silent. The assault surged. Galatas was taken that afternoon in savage house-to-house fighting. It didn't last. German reinforcements arrived in the night, and by the evening of May 26th, the New Zealanders were withdrawing toward Suda Bay. The evacuation had begun. Crete was slipping away. That night, a runner found Hulme at the battalion assembly area with a message scrawled on the scrap of paper. Hulme read it twice in the darkness. His younger brother, Corporal Harold Charles Hulme, had been killed that day fighting with 19th Battalion, northeast of Galatas. Hulme folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He picked up the rifle again. He didn't show grief. He didn't announce revenge. But something inside him locked into place. The withdrawal could wait for everyone else. The snipers harassing the retreating New Zealanders were about to meet a man who had decided this war had become personal. Before dawn on May 27th, Hulme positioned himself on high ground overlooking the road towards Suda Bay. Below him, 23rd Battalion moved west in a fighting withdrawal. Behind them, German advance elements pressed hard, trying to cut off the retreat before the Allies could reach the beaches. Snipers traveled with that advance, working the ridgelines to break the command structure, targeting officers and NCOs, snapping the spine of a unit in motion. Hulme hadn't slept. He'd spent the night moving through German positions, learning their patterns, identifying the most dangerous shooters, memorizing the ground. Now he worked methodically. One target appeared, confident and experienced, settling into a firing point on rock above the road. Hulme tracked him through the scope, waited until the man committed to his position, and shot him cleanly. Then Hulme moved immediately, because the first rule of surviving a sniper fight is to never give the enemy a second chance to find you. As the morning advanced, Hulme kept changing angles, shifting positions, taking shooters one by one along the withdrawal route. With each sniper removed, the New Zealand rearguard gained a little breathing space. The battalion moved faster. Casualties dropped. Formations held. Most of the men below never knew why the fire suddenly eased. They only felt that it had. Later that morning, Hulme saw something worse than single shooters. A group establishing a coordinated position on a hillside that would rake an exposed flank. If those rifles stayed in place, the withdrawal would turn into slaughter. Hulme approached from the north, not creeping, not hiding, but walking steadily in German camouflage, with the captured rifle slung like it belonged to him. The Germans spotted him from hundreds of yards away. One waved, another shouted something. Hulme waved back and kept coming. At close range, one of the Germans stood up and walked toward him, smiling, speaking as if to a fellow soldier, casual, confident, unguarded. Hulme raised the rifle and shot him in the chest. For a half-second, the remaining men froze, trapped between what their eyes had just seen and what their brains insisted was impossible. Hulme worked the bolt smoothly and fired again. Then again. The last man managed to bring his rifle up and send a round cracking past Hulme's head into rock. But Hulme's next shot ended it. He searched them quickly. Ammunition, signaling gear, field glasses, written orders that made the purpose of those snipers explicit, to hit the withdrawal and cut it apart. The paperwork told Hulme something else, too. German intelligence had a frighteningly accurate picture of where the retreat was going. Hulme took what mattered and continued forward. By early afternoon, his confirmed count had climbed again. During a brief halt, his commander tracked him down and spoke to him directly. The sniper fire was costing lives the rearguard couldn't afford to lose. Could Hulme keep operating independently? Hulme said yes. He didn't mention his brother. He didn't explain his motivation. The colonel handed him written authorization to continue on his own for as long as necessary and to take whatever equipment he required. Hulme was back out ahead of the battalion within hours, scouting the next stretch. Terrain that looked like a textbook kill zone. A narrow valley with high ground dominating both sides. He found 3 German snipers already set among rocks, disciplined and well concealed, waiting for the New Zealanders to enter the trap. Hulme eliminated all three before the lead elements arrived. The battalion moved through without losing a single man to sniper fire. By nightfall on May 27th, Hulme had made the withdrawal safer, one shot at a time. But the retreat still wasn't finished. Before dawn on May 28th, 23rd Battalion began pulling back again, moving toward Stylos across exposed ground with limited cover. German pressure came from multiple directions, and the rear guard action was degrading into constant contact. Hulme moved ahead in the dark to the high ground that dominated the route. Whoever controlled that ridge controlled the road. He reached it and saw the next disaster forming, a German heavy mortar team setting up on the military crest, aligning the weapon to drop fire onto the exact stretch of road the New Zealanders would be forced to use at their most vulnerable moment. Hulme was too far for a safe rifle shot. He could report it, but by the time a response came, the mortar would already be firing and men would already be dying. So Hulme made the same choice he'd been making all week. Act now. Alone. He used folds of ground and rock to close in, but the final distance required open ground under full view of the mortar team. Hulme stood up, adjusted the German camouflage, and walked straight toward them. The Germans saw him, waved, called out a question, then went back to their work. To them, he looked like another paratrooper checking adjacent positions. At 15 yards, Hulme raised the rifle and fired. One German dropped. Hulme worked the bolt and fired again. A second fell. The remaining two scrambled. Too late. Hulme shot them both before either could bring a weapon to bear. He reached the mortar and saw how close the battalion had come to catastrophe. Ammunition was stacked and ready, enough rounds to tear a withdrawal to pieces. Hulme disabled the weapon, ripping out a critical part and throwing it down the hillside, then scattering what he could so it couldn't be used quickly. From that ridge he had clear observation of the approaches, and he spotted more German snipers moving into place to build a coordinated kill zone. Hulme went after them immediately. One never saw him coming. One dropped after a single shot. The third was different, more alert, more careful. When Hulme was still 80 yards away, the German turned and looked straight at him. For a long moment, the two men simply stared across the distance, each trying to decide whether what he was seeing made sense at all. The German's eyes didn't stay on the terrain. They climbed up Hulme's camouflage smock, paused on his face, then dropped to the rifle in his hands. Something clicked. Wrong jawline, wrong stillness, the posture of a man pretending. The sniper started to swing his weapon up. Hulme fired first. The German collapsed, but he still managed to squeeze off a shot as he fell. The bullet slammed high into Hulme's left shoulder and jolted him sideways like he'd been hit with a hammer. He dropped to one knee, teeth clenched, worked the bolt on pure reflex and fired again to make sure the sniper stayed down. Warm blood spread under the borrowed camouflage. The wound wasn't a graze. Hulme could feel the ugly truth of it. Deep damage, heavy bleeding, bone involved. He needed a medic. Immediately. But below him, the 23rd Battalion was still threading through the withdrawal route, and the ridgelines were still crawling with German shooters. If he left now, men would keep dying unseen. He tore a strip from the dead German's clothing and cinched it tight around his shoulder for a crude field dressing. It slowed the bleeding, but it didn't stop it. He picked the rifle up with his right hand. His left arm wasn't obeying him anymore, hanging useless and numb. Still, he stayed on that ridge. Not long after, he spotted another German marksman easing toward a firing point overlooking the road, moving with the careful confidence of someone who had done this before. Hulme tried to bring the rifle up one-handed, braced it against stone, and squinted through the scope. The sight picture wobbled. His vision was starting to swim. He forced the trigger anyway. The shot missed. The German snapped toward him instantly and fired back. The second round hit Hulme in the same shoulder, ripping through what was left and shattering more bone. Hulme pitched backward behind the rocks. The captured rifle clattered and slid downslope out of reach. His left arm was dead weight now. Blood pooled beneath him, hot and frighteningly fast. He could hear the German moving closer, boots on gravel. Slow, methodical steps. A professional, finishing a wounded enemy. 30 feet. 20. The German wasn't rushing. He knew wounded men could still fight. Hume's right hand found a loose stone about the size of a grenade. He was fading, not from fear but from blood loss, the body shutting systems down in the simplest way possible. The footsteps stopped close, 10 feet or so, then shifted. The sniper was circling, looking for a clean angle that wouldn't expose him. Hume threw the first rock hard to his left. It bounced and clattered against stone a few dozen feet away. The German spun toward the sound and fired twice. 2 sharp cracks, wasted rounds into empty space. In the same instant, Hume rolled the other way, grabbed another rock and hurled it straight at the German's head. It didn't kill him, but it staggered him. The rifle dipped. That was all Hume needed. He lunged forward on one functional arm, driving his weight into the German's legs. Both men went down in a violent tangle of stone, cloth, and breath. The sniper fought to swing his rifle around. Hume seized the barrel with his right hand and wrenched it sideways. The German clawed for a knife. Hume smashed his forehead into the man's face. Once, twice, felt cartilage give, felt the resistance weaken, then kept pressing until the struggle drained out of the German's body. For a moment, Hume lay there on top of him, panting, trying not to black out. His shoulder felt like it wasn't even attached anymore. Blood was everywhere. And the ridge, moments ago a hunting ground, was suddenly just a lonely place where men bled out. When he could move again, he looked down. The withdrawal route below was empty now. The battalion had already passed through. He was alone with dead Germans, shattered bone, and no way to signal friendly forces. So he started crawling. He dragged himself downhill, pulling his useless left arm along, following the same route his battalion had taken, leaving dark smears where the bandage couldn't hold. A New Zealand patrol finally found him collapsed on the road miles from Stylos. One look at his shoulder, and the patrol commander shouted for stretcher bearers. Hume tried to speak, tried to warn them about German positions and where the shooters were moving, but his mouth wouldn't shape the words properly. They carried him to the battalion aid post. The medical officer took one glance at the wound and tagged him for evacuation. Both bullets had wrecked the shoulder blade. Fragments were buried in muscle. Without surgery, he'd lose the arm, or die from infection. That afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Leckie visited him. He brought field reports. Sniper activity along the withdrawal had almost vanished where Hume had been working. The rear guard had taken fewer losses than anyone expected. The mortar position Hume had broken up would have carved through men packed on a road. Leckie told him the recommendation was going forward, for the Victoria Cross. Hume asked only one question that mattered to him. Had anyone recovered his brother? Was there a grave? Leckie had no answer. The 19th Battalion had pulled back under heavy contact. Many dead had been left where they fell. The withdrawal continued without him. By the end of May, the surviving New Zealanders were moving toward the south coast for evacuation as the Royal Navy tried to lift Allied troops off the beaches under relentless German air attack. Hume was loaded onto a destroyer with other wounded men and carried out into the dark sea. German aircraft hit the convoy on the way out. Anti-aircraft guns hammered the sky. The ship shuddered with every burst. Hume watched the flashes from the medical bay, unable to do anything but lie still and fight the instinct to move, because moving meant tearing the wound open again. They reached Alexandria days later. Surgeons worked for hours pulling fragments, repairing what could be repaired, deciding what could be saved. When they were done, the verdict was blunt. He would never regain full use of that shoulder. His war, at least as a fighting soldier, was finished. 2 weeks later, he was placed aboard a hospital ship bound for New Zealand. The voyage felt endless. He spent most of it staring at a ceiling and replaying Crete, his brother's name on paper, the ridgelines, the snipers he'd hunted, the men who'd made it off the island because rifles weren't waiting for them in the rocks. He arrived back in Auckland in July 1941. His wife, Rona, was on the pier. She hadn't been told how badly he was hurt. When she saw him come down the gangway with his left arm strapped and his body stripped down by weeks of blood loss and stress, she broke. Rehabilitation followed. Therapy, evaluations, boards that measured a man in degrees of range of motion and wrote "unfit" in neat handwriting. Hulme didn't argue. He could barely lift the arm above his chest. In late August, a telegram arrived from Army headquarters in Wellington. The Victoria Cross recommendation had been approved. It would be officially announced in October. He was ordered to report to Government House for the presentation. He read the telegram twice and put it away. The award didn't bring his brother back. It didn't change the outcome on Crete. It didn't erase what he'd seen. In October, the official citation appeared in the London Gazette. It described his actions across those 8 days, leading attacks around Maleme, breaking a machine gun post at Galatas, disrupting enemy fire during the withdrawal, stalking and shooting enemy snipers before he was severely wounded. It was formal, measured, careful. It did not explain the disguise. It did not spell out the deception. It gave the facts it could safely print and left the rest in silence. The newspapers at home filled the silence with celebration. They wanted a clean story, a farm laborer turned national hero, a lone sergeant who hunted snipers behind enemy lines. The public loved it. Hulme didn't. He traveled to Wellington for the ceremony because he was ordered to. Cameras flashed. Officials made speeches about courage and tradition. The Governor-General pinned the medal on. Hulme stood at attention and thought about an unmarked place on an island the Allies had abandoned. Afterward, a reporter asked what it felt like to be called a hero. Hulme said it didn't feel like anything. The reporter pressed, when did he decide to take German equipment? Was he afraid? Hulme gave the same answer he would give for the rest of his life. There was no dramatic moment. He saw an opportunity and took it. Everyone was afraid. Then he walked away. He was formally discharged as medically unfit the following year. A man in his early 30s with the Victoria Cross and a shoulder that would never work right again, sent back to civilian life while the war kept burning overseas and his battalion kept fighting without him. Later, the government recalled him for home service, training, administration, anything that didn't require him to carry a rifle for miles. He did the work, reached warrant officer rank, and then left the army again. After the war, he built a life that required steady hands more than strong shoulders. He moved to the Bay of Plenty, bought a small trucking business, hauled freight, kept his world practical and quiet. He married, raised 2 sons, and almost never spoke about Crete. When veterans groups invited him to talk, he declined. When people asked about the Victoria Cross, he changed the subject. In 1946, he went to London for the victory celebrations with other Commonwealth 5th Sea recipients. Dinners, parades, photographs, handshakes. He smiled because that's what you did, and privately wished he was back home on a road with a load to deliver. Over the years, historians tracked down men from the 23rd Battalion and asked what they remembered. Some said they had seen Hulme in German camouflage. Others talked about finding dead snipers with no clear explanation. Stories piled up. The legend grew. Hulme never fed it and never publicly corrected it. He simply refused the conversation altogether. When a researcher asked him decades later how he felt about killing so many men, Hulme said he didn't feel anything about it. When asked what he did think about, he said his brother. When asked if he had regrets, he answered with the same cold, impossible standard he'd held himself to on that ridge. The only regret was that one more sniper had nearly gotten away. Life kept moving. His son Dennis became a world-famous racing driver, and reporters arrived looking for quotes. They found an older man running a trucking company with a Victoria Cross in a drawer and no interest in reliving any of it. He attended Anzac Day commemorations without speeches. When the Army Museum at WWII asked to display his medal, he agreed only if they didn't turn it into a circus. He died in 1982, buried with military honors the way the Army insisted, not the way he would have advertised. The service was brief. No grand eulogies, no theatrical hero talk. Exactly what he seemed to want. The medal outlived him. In 2007, thieves broke into the museum and stole his Victoria Cross, along with several others. an act that triggered outrage across New Zealand and far beyond. A large reward was offered. In early 2008, police recovered all the medals undamaged, and that returned the story to the question that never really goes away. What did Hulme actually change on Crete? On paper, the Battle of Crete was a defeat. The island fell. Thousands of Allied soldiers were killed or captured. Survivors evacuated to Egypt under air attack. German losses were severe enough that Hitler became wary of large airborne operations afterward. But Germany still held Crete, and the Allies did not. So in that context, one sergeant can look like a footnote. Dozens of snipers dead against a campaign measured in thousands. But numbers can hide what matters. Snipers don't just kill bodies. They kill leaders, radio operators, medics, the people who keep a unit coherent when everything is collapsing. Even a small drop in sniper effectiveness during a withdrawal can mean the difference between an organized retreat and a rout. That's why Hulme's work haunted the men who survived. They could feel the change when the rifle cracks stopped. They could feel the moment daylight became survivable again. They knew, without needing to see the ridge, that someone had been out there between them and the enemy. People still argue about the method, about the law, about whether wearing enemy clothing crosses a line, about how quickly you lose protection if you're discovered. The official citation chose its words carefully and left the disguise out for a reason. What matters is that Hulme understood the risk every time he stepped forward, dressed like the men hunting them. If he'd been exposed, he likely wouldn't have been taken prisoner. He would have been shot as an imposter. He did it anyway, again and again, until the deception finally cracked and the bullet found his shoulder. And that's the part doctrine can't teach. Not the marksmanship, not the patience. The ability to walk straight toward enemy soldiers, close enough to be seen clearly, and hold the mask on your face until the last instant. Then act without hesitation. Many soldiers tried to imitate legends like that later. Most of them paid for it immediately. That's why Hulme remained singular. One sergeant, a handful of days, a brutal little pocket of war on a Greek island, and a tactic that worked once because the circumstances were chaos, and the man doing it had the nerve to turn that chaos into a weapon. In the end, the Victoria Cross citation reduces it to a neat line. 33 enemy snipers stalked and shot before he was badly wounded. 33 is the number printed in archives, but the real meaning of that number isn't in the kills. It's in the men who didn't die on a road, because the rifles waiting in the rocks never fired. And if there's a final truth in Hulme's own silence, it's this. He never asked to be remembered for the medal. He only cared that his battalion made it out alive, and that his brother did not.